is presenting Synchronicity, Serendipity, and a Small World. Thomas graduated from Duke University, where he spent 2 years studying ethics, world religions, symbolic communication, and Jungian psychology, followed by study in the Divinity School. His first master's degree in psychotherapy and social change led to licensure as a marriage, family, and child therapist and specialty in transformational group psychotherapy. He earned his second Masters and Doctorate in clinical psychology from Palo Alto University. After working at the interface of clinical psychology and psychic emergency in both inpatient and outpatient settings, he helped launch the Association of Psychic Practitioners in Northern California in 1983. Since 1993, he's been an active member of the Mankind Project, becoming a declared elder in 2019. After calling North Carolina home for many years, more than 4 decades, he returned to the West Coast in 2020 to be near his daughter and grandchildren in Seattle. So with that, welcome, Thomas. I always enjoy your presentation so much.
Thank you. I should say I'm always ambivalent about having my appellation be Dr. Thomas Griggs on the screen. The reason I leave it there is because it's the default for 99% of the calls that I'm on Zoom. And I leave it there to differentiate myself from wonderful Thomas Hedberg. So I don't mean to be pretentious. It's just a differentiator. But I guess it led to a wonderful conversation with Sarah, among other things, about getting started on her thesis. So I have a few ideas to share, and then I'm going to invite everyone to share your experiences of synchronicity, serendipity, and a small world. And I'll give a couple of ideas about where that came from. First, I'm going to put a little quote up. This is the signature that I have had on my email for a number of years. Okay. It is because our universe is both exquisitely intelligent and interconnected in every possible aspect that we are able to see the deepest meaning of our lives reflected everywhere and in everything around us. The path to our collective future may thus be discovered when we allow a precious wilderness to speak directly to our hearts.
Precious wilderness.
Yeah, people ask me who to attribute the quote to, and I say, well, I just made that up because it's what I believe. That's where that came from. So our topic today was sparked by the previous session that Mary Grace led. Thank you, Mary Grace, because that was a wonderful session on non-ordinary states of consciousness back on August 22nd. During our discussion that morning, as people shared, in addition to reports of non-ordinary states of consciousness, I began to hear some references to experiences of serendipity and synchronicity, which are not the same thing as non-ordinary states of consciousness. They're more ways of perceiving the world, or ways of making meaning of the world, or recognizing the world. We got into a very brief thing about the definition of serendipity. So that kind of caught my attention. And then we talked briefly about a possible session on crossroads. What if, and the road not taken. And again, it's about our relationship to what we fondly call reality in the physical world, and what we do and where we go and what we encounter. So I found myself wondering what all these various experiences had in common, and why we were eager to share them, and why we were resonating those various stories. And then later, I think last week, was it? Or so, we were talking about the experience of encountering unexpected beauty and the power of awe that our reaction to unexpected beauty is this sense of awe, which is a profound impact. And all these phenomena contribute to deepening, I would say, deepening our awareness of our relationship to our living environment, of which we are an integral part. We're not in the environment, we are the environment. No more, no less. So it also seems to me that there is a beautiful paradox and mystery at play here, in that we're encountering deep meaning and we experience surprise and wonder in these various circumstances. And at the same time, in each case, we are, I think, tempted or at risk for slipping into a trap of determinism, in which case the mysterious beauty could be compromised. What I mean by that is, if we go looking for cause and effect and impose our reasoning on these events, it can destroy the power and the beauty of them, or lead us down a trail that we might not want to go down. So that's about causality. And I believe that we're raised in a culture that is compulsively searching for causes, as if we can find a cause, then we've somehow proven something is true. Yet the great truths are not, in my judgment, cause and effect. An astrologer I respect a great deal, that I studied with for 10 years, said there are two kinds of truth. There's big truth and small truth. The opposite of a small truth is a lie. The opposite of a big truth is another big truth. So we don't want to impose too much deductive cause-effect reasoning on things, lest we miss a bigger picture. So it's sometimes useful and comforting to imagine that we are bound by gravity and space and time, and we are thus limited by cause and effect. Even though we don't want our spirits to be limited, I think we seek out the structure, and because of the culture we live in, we seek out these explanations. And nowhere is this more true than, in my experience, when we start talking about astrology. Because I bet all of us have run into somebody who objects to astrology on the grounds that it's a free will versus determinism argument. They object to astrology because the planets don't control me. They don't tell me what to feel. They don't cause my actions. Well, it's kind of a straw man argument, because in my judgment, astrologers aren't claiming, at least the ones I like, aren't claiming there's a cause-effect relationship. But there is a synchronistic relationship, an a-causal connecting principle is the point. So we see meaning and we derive meaning, we recognize meaning without the requirement that there be cause and effect. So I'm in the same universe as the moon, and my emotions reflect the moon's activity and location, but the moon doesn't cause my emotions any more than my emotions cause the moon to go through its phases. We are just intelligently interconnected and reflective, which is where that quote came from that I put up a little bit. So I hope you're thinking now, we're about to turn it over to you. What are some examples in your life that you identify as synchronicity? And what are some examples that maybe you discovered you've had a serendipitous experience? Those are not the same thing. And just for fun, I threw in another one, It's a Small World, which is any stories that you've had an encounter where something highly improbable occurred. And again, it's not necessarily synchronicity, and it's not necessarily serendipity, but it's really curious and it's wondrous. And it's reflecting our relationship to the world in which we live. I'll give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about. Let me put this back up the screen. So synchronicity is an acausal connecting principle, and that's about meaning. The connection between the two events is a meaningful connection. It's not an irrelevant one. And that's the key in my judgment when we talk about synchronicity. It's that they're meaningfully connected. It's profoundly important that these two events exist in the world. They call our attention to something that is transcendent and beyond either of the events. And I'm making this up. Don't worry about whether it's true or not. If it works, have fun with it. But then serendipity is different. It's a fortuitous encounter. It's about getting lucky. It's about something happening that was a good thing that we didn't engineer. And it's almost like the world smiled upon us. And it's not really connecting two events in a meaningful way, although it might be, but it could be just, I was so lucky that this happened. And make up your own definitions for these. Don't worry about classifying them the way I'm doing. I've always thought I could understand a phenomenon better if I looked for small distinctions within it. That's like looking for the writing on the tennis ball instead of just looking toward the ball, if any of you know about that. And the other is the small world thing, but those are stories of the unlikely. Like, what are the chances of something? So I already gave the example of astrology as being primarily a conversation about synchronicity. I'm just not exactly sure where this fits in, but does anybody know why the archer is the symbol of Sagittarius? I always wondered about that. What's an archer got to do with Sagittarius? Well, it turns out that Sagittarius is the sign for long journeys over water. It's the sign for travel, either physical or mental, to go on a journey. And the purpose of the journey is to discover something about ourselves. And the purpose of learning and discovering something about ourselves is, in fact, to develop a personal ethic. That learning results in a more noble orientation to our place in the world and how we will be in the world. That's the purpose of self-development. So Sagittarius is about consuming experience and education and knowledge, and just insatiable for that purpose. That's how, especially if it's a sun sign, wired that way. But what's that got to do with an archer? Well, I finally kind of got it figured out. Yeah, Jonathan. So the arc back and the arrow is in the bow, but it's not launched. It's the potential of where that arrow might travel. And so it's going on a journey, and it could go on a meaningful journey. Whether that journey is meaningful depends on the aim of the archer. Where the archer points the arrow is where the arrow is going to fly. So the intention of the archer is part of what creates the journey and the meaning of the journey, if you will. So it's the image of the potentiality of the travel and the discovery that is embedded in that image of the archer with the bow drawn back. It's just before the journey begins, but it prefigures where it might go. So that satisfied scratching an itch about why is that the glyph for Sagittarius. Now, so you hear the conversation there about meaning, and it's not cause and effect, though. I mean, Sagittarius and journeys of education. Where is that? Okay, so then serendipity. I was told not to apply to college because I was a troubled youth and I had bad grades and I didn't have a portfolio to get me into any decent schools. But I was so rebellious that I went ahead and applied to 12 different colleges that I thought I wanted to go to. And the counselor at my school disparaged me and told me that was pointless. I shouldn't even bother. But I got into one college, the only one I got into. So that's where I went. And we used to sit around as freshmen and talk about, how did you get in? I don't know. How did you get in? Well, I never found out why I got in. I don't even know to this day. But everything about my life is built on that serendipitous event. Because I met my wife there. My children are a result of that one little event. Because I was in Durham, North Carolina, I happened to find out about a wonderful one-time only master's program that never existed again, that lasted for 18 months in psychotherapy and social change, that laid the groundwork for everything I've ever done since professionally. But it all hinged on that one little moment that somebody made a decision to let me in when nobody else would. So I think that's how I think of serendipity. So think of your stories, Mike. One more, small world, and then I'm going to open the floor. So when my daughter was about 7 years old, we took her and her brother to a trip to the Tetons. And some of you may have heard this story before. And we were leaving Yellowstone and we're driving north along the river. It was a hot day. And Kat started, she was Katie back then, was complaining that she was hot. And I said, well, sweetie, we can go swimming. You know, here's the river right here. You can get in the water, cool off. She said, I can't. I don't have a swimming suit. We'd packed for the mountains. And I said, no, it's okay. Don't worry about it. You can just go in. And nobody's around. We haven't seen anybody. And nobody's going to see you. Don't worry about it. You can just go swimming. So I finally talked her into it. She gets out in the water, naked as a little 7-year-old jaybird. And no sooner was she out there than 2 helicopters came flying low right over her, right over the river, heading toward Yellowstone. She was so mad at me for the longest time about that. Roll the clock forward now. She's 31 years old, I believe, and she's decided she's leaving West Palm Beach and she's moving to Seattle. So she's packed up everything she owns, pulling a trailer, a couple of dogs, and $1,000 in her pocket. She's traveling to the West Coast to live. And I fly out to meet her. I'm supposed to meet her in Billings, but there's a massive snowstorm, closes down everything, closes the interstate. This is, I think, in early October, and it closed Glacier National Park. We were planning to hang out for a week. So everything was paralyzed. So I said, if you can, if it's safe, keep driving, and I will get to where I can get to. So I spent the night on the floor of the airport in Salt Lake City, got my first flight out the next morning, but it didn't go to Billings, it went to Bozeman. So I said, I'll meet you in Bozeman as soon as I get in, like 6:30 in the morning. And then I remembered, I have a friend, a consultant that I really liked who lived in Bozeman. So I called Barbara up, and I said, hey, are you going to be around? She says, well, actually, we're in Yellowstone working on the Wolf Project, but we will be back by tomorrow morning and love to get together and have breakfast. So we get to this little cafe in Bozeman, and we're sitting there with Barbara and her partner, whose name is Michael, whom I've never met, on one side of the booth. Kat and I are on the other side of the booth. And I remember the story about the Yellowstone River. I say, doesn't it flow north out of Yellowstone? They go, yeah. I say, and I told them the story about the cat and the helicopters coming over. And Michael, who's sitting across, whom I've never met, says, I was in the helicopter. Small world. What are the chances of that? Well, he said, the reason I know is because it's the only time Bill Clinton ever gave a speech at a national park. And that's what we were doing that day. Small world, right? Now, floor is open. Take your, and so notice when you tell whatever story you have, notice how it impacted you. What feelings did you have? What awareness did you have? Whatever. Diana, go ahead.
Yeah, well, you probably all know my book, Send Me Someone. It's just so full of so much serendipity and synchronicity and all of that, that I would know to go stand in a hotel lobby in Hong Kong early in the morning and meet Paul von Wellnitz and be engaged 3 days later. And then, and when he was dying, he said, "I don't want you to be alone." I said, "Send me someone." He said, "I will." And 2 months later, Ted Wentworth walked into the Inside Edge, and his first line to me was, "Will you live with me?" So it's just, I expect these things. And I think the frequency of expectation is really great because we're just open to it. So I have a small world thing. I was visiting my daughter, Lexi, and I was worrying about keeping my mobility and being able to go to Mexico and speak there next month. And I said, "Gosh, I just missed my trainer so much. He came to my house twice a week for 10 years. And I don't even know what happened to him, but boy, I wish he were around." And I hear, "Diana." And I look up and it's Mike. It's my trainer. I mean, how does this even happen? He lives 2 blocks from my daughter. So, things are just, I think we don't pay enough attention to this. I think it's really something that is key to our lives, and that there's a benevolent force that loves to amaze us and surprise us. So it's a great topic. Thank you.
Thank you. You're the poster child for this one. Yeah, Patricia, go ahead.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
In my other life, I used to edit video, and I edited a video of this flamenco dancer. So I spent hours seeing him dancing. When I finished that video, 2 weeks later, my husband at the time and I flew to Spain. And the flamenco dancer was here in LA when I did that video. Okay, 2 weeks later, we fly to Spain. We went partying with our friends. They go from bar to bar all night. I think it was 5 a.m. when we decided to go back to the hotel. And we are crossing this avenue. There is absolutely no one in the street except a young man coming this way. And as we crossed, it was the flamenco dancer. I thought I was dreaming, like I've been seeing him for so many hours for so long. I said, "Jose?" I said, "Oh my God, Patricia." Here we're in the middle of the avenue at 5 a.m, Avenida Castellana in Madrid.
Wow.
That was one. And another one, very fast, A Small World, both. My ex and I went to Ensenada. We just went as an adventure, and we went to the first hotel we found. And when we parked the car next to our car, I said, "Oh, that's my coworker's car. I wonder who he's with." Because I knew he was single. Oh, my ex said, "How do you know that's his?" Because I know his stickers. I mean, you recognize the car. So the next morning we're having breakfast, and I was thinking, I wonder who he will come up with. He came with another coworker. It was a secret office affair. When they saw me, they almost fainted. And she said, "Of all the people, I'm glad it was you, because I know you will keep the secret." And I said, "I will." Small world.
Thank you. Hyacinth, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I love this. There's that book called God Winks about these kind of experiences. Okay, so you all know I'm a Christian Scientist, and the level that I've achieved in my career has afforded me housing in Azusa at a place called Mankowski Homes. I'm not there yet, but I've been approved and I'll be there. So I have a friend named Kevin, an African-American man that I met at Goodwill, who happens to be from Compton. So we all wanted to know why this woman has given such an amazing, loving response to make this housing so affordable. So they did a presentation on her. We get there. Now, Christian Science is a very not so color. There's not too many people of color in the religion. And, so we go to this event. Kevin, my mother, and I are the three, and my girlfriend are the three poor people of color. And we're looking at the event, and we see that this woman's parents were the founders of all the cities in the world, Compton, California. And we're looking up there like, what? Could this be true? And when we left there, that lady that gave the presentation said, thank you for coming. And she told Kevin, it was so nice to meet you, because they spent the whole time talking about Compton, because he's like the unofficial mayor of Compton. I mean, that was like, oh my God, how could that have happened? Thank you so much for this session. I love this. I love hearing stories like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Amy?
Yeah, great topic. So I think this might be all three. So my dad, before he passed, he got sepsis, and we're in the hospital, and we're in his room, and this nurse walks in. And if you've heard this, I'm sorry, I'm saying it again, but this nurse walks in, and I'm like, I know you. And I'm in Utah, and she's like, I know you too. I'm like, okay, how do we know each other? I don't live here. And she's like, and so we tried to figure it out. And my mother, being the consummate genealogist, she goes, I'll figure it out. Tell me who your grandparents are. Tell me who your people are. And so then she tells her who her people are, and we're related. And she comes from my grandmother's side. And I'm like, my gosh, that's amazing. I can't believe our DNA recognized each other, that's how we know each other. I said, can I follow you on Instagram? Which I never say. I'm usually a Facebook person. And she's like, that'd be great. I'd love to follow you. So fast forward months later, I get my dad's in serious health issues, and I'm in California, and I get a call from the hospital, and they say, we have to do this thing to your dad. And I somehow was advocate. I don't know how that happened. And I say, you may not, don't do that. You may not do that. I will call you back after you run tests. So I went and meditated outside. And when I meditated, this woman's face appeared, and I woke from my meditation, and I got on Instagram, and I texted her, and I said, are you by chance at the hospital? Do you still work at that hospital? She goes, yeah, I'm here now. What do you need? I go, my dad's in room such and such. Could you go check on it? She's like, I'm walking right now. And within 30 seconds, I had eyes on my dad from my phone, and he was sitting up in a chair, not needing any type of morphine or anything. And he was like, hey, that's my daughter. How do you know her? And it was this, God winks type thing that was like, I don't know how that happened, but I know that was divinely serendipitous and synchronistic, and it's a small world.
Thanks, Amy. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, Paul. I see you, Bonnie.
Well, I'm sure the one that comes to mind just happened about a year ago. Joel's best friend went into a assisted living near here, and first we were getting calls from his other niece, and anyway, then this niece, Rachel. And then the first time we go to see Ben in his new room there, and Rachel, she looks at me and she said, Janowski, that's an unusual name. Are you related to, I thought she was going to say, I was thinking of my older cousin, Lori, but then she said Aviva. Anyway, Ben's niece and my cousin Aviva have been they're now in their 50s and they've been best friends since 2 years old, when their moms were in some mom and me classes, but we're related. And it's funny, physically to me, she looks like Aviva. But anyway, that was just astounding. Wow. Yeah, never expected that. And there are many others, but that's the one that came to mind now.
Thank you. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know which category this fits in, but my mother died before my father, which my dad was very upset. I'm supposed to die first and all that. And so I was kind of worried about her, after her death. And one morning, I don't think I was dreaming, I think I was awake. There stood my mother at the foot of my bed, and she said, "I'm okay now, Paul. I'm okay now." Somehow her spirit came to me because she knew I was worried. So I don't know where that fits, but thought I'd share it.
We're agreeing not to worry about where it fits, aren't we? Whitney, go ahead.
Oh, that was beautiful, Paul. Thank you. I had a crazy boyfriend from when I was 16, and he just popped up all over my life. But the two of the craziest times was I'd just gotten the job in Mexico, and the second day I was there, I fell in love with a violinist. And so we were in Mexico City before a break for Christmas. And walking down the street, I was in a brand new country, brand new job, brand new man, brand new city, Mexico City, walking down the street. And this other couple, there was another couple walking toward us, or no, it was just a man by himself. And it was that old boyfriend. He was living in New Mexico at the time, and he just happened to be visiting Mexico City. And I hadn't seen him for 15 years. And so we had dinner, his girlfriend and him, and then so that was an amazing experience to run into him in a foreign country. And I was in a foreign country another time in Paris, living in Paris, and I lived in a pension, like a boarding house kind of thing with a bunch of students. And there was a knock on the door after dinner one night, and somebody answered it, and it was this same boyfriend man. And he was in some trip around the world. He never made it around the world, but he stayed in Paris for quite a few months. So we got to hang out in Paris. It's nuts. Musically, that it's been quite a lot of that stuff happens all the time. Being in an airport and seeing a conductor while I'm on my way to an audition, or turning on the television and there's a cello thing while I'm with someone, we're talking about cellos, and that kind of stuff happens a lot. But it's a fun topic. Thanks a lot, Tommy.
I'm hearing that a lot of us have multiple stories, so I want to thank you. Yeah, so I want to invite you to take a pass at one of them, and then if we have more time, you can do another one. Lavita, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It's like two are flitting around in actually three. And Whitney just brought up a memory. After my parents died, I just felt like an orphan. I felt like I didn't know where, Linda has often said she didn't know where her feet were. And that's such a apt description of certain times in our life. And we happened to have rented a houseboat, and we're out on Lake Powell in the middle of nowhere with these giant caverns and caves. And we pulled up on a beach for the night, and I drug a mattress out on the top of the deck, and it was hot and steamy and beautiful and pristine and rugged. And I just felt like I was nowhere, and I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know where my feet were. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and I just kept thinking, I don't know where I am. It was like metaphorically and truly, I didn't know where I was. And I looked up into this blanket of stars that had no beginning or end. I kind of, I lost track of me, and I rolled over on my stomach and I looked down and there was a blanket of stars. And it was like, I just laid there and thought, how could this happen? Above me is stars and below me is stars, and I don't know where I am. And I'm in the middle of it. And the water was so still. It was kind of like behind you, Tommy. It was like it reflected the sky. I'm going to cry. And I was in the middle of it all, in the universe. And if something's going to happen extraordinary, it'll usually be in nature with me. And I just laid there and I thought, I don't need to know where I am. I'm just part of it. I'm just, it was like no ending of the sky or the stars or the me or the boat or, it was fabulous. And just briefly, I'm going to take two, naughty. I was with Whitney in a group in up in Taos, New Mexico. And I think it's the same boyfriend of hers who I never met. And the group I was with, all Mastery Circle people, took off for a night, and I was waiting for a late arrival. So I thought I was alone in the house. And this man who was a friend of Whitney's came out and said, what are you doing here? I thought you went with all the others. And I said, no, I'm waiting for a friend to come, and she, will need some navigating. And he said, I'll tell you what, wait a minute. And he disappeared, and he came back in, and he opened a violin case. And he said, how about I play something for you? Now, I didn't know him. I knew no history or anything. Whitney filled me in later. I sat and listened to him playing, and I thought, oh God, this guy's good. And he stopped playing and he said, I'd like you to know this is a Stradivarius. And I'm playing this because I needed to hear something beautiful. It gets back to the John O'Donohue book on beauty. And he started playing again, and it broke my heart. And I just sat with tears running down my cheeks and thought, look where I am. I'm in Taos, New Mexico. I'm safe with people I enjoy, and I'm listening to a Stradivarius. What are the chances? And I just sat and went, Mama, look at me now. And I was so thrilled. Ends up, he was a professor, I believe, Whitney, correct me if I'm wrong, a professor, a chair at the university, teaching people how to be master musicians. And here he was, I'm having a private concert, and I was just godsmacked and in awe. Thank you, Thomas, for the topic.
Thank you. Bill?
Yes, thank you again. Yes, thank you, Thomas. Amazing stuff. I just briefly, I want to share. For me, it's one of the highlights, and I think many of you have heard it before, so bear with me. But it's just perhaps bears retelling. Allison has always loved basset hounds, and she told me, she said, when we get married, we're going to have a house in Highland Park. We're going to have a backyard, and where basset hounds can run around. So okay, all right. So that came to be, and we adopted two older bassets from a rescue. They came as a bonded pair, and at some point, one of them, the vet said he had 2 months to live, advanced cancer. Devastating. And so, but Allison said immediately, she said, well, we've got to find a dog to replace him. And that's much easier said than done, because they came as a bonded pair, older dog. And the next morning, I'm walking the two of them in Highland Park, ready to cross the street. A truck pulls up, a guy leans out the window. He goes, hey, my wife has a basset hound puppy she can't keep. Do you want it? That has I've never been offered a dog before, somebody driving by, ever, before or since. And I'm looking at her right now. Spike is here today. And it's just a little thing. It's also what a small world, and many good things there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bill. I see 4 hands. If you go 2 minutes each, we'll have time for each of you. Carol?
Hi. So I think this is certainly about serendipity and maybe a small world. So it's my very first time of performing Don Anna in Don Giovanni. And this was at the point where I was about to enter stage again with my boyfriend, who I had brought to help fight off Don Giovanni from my bedroom. And meanwhile, my father was fighting with him, and they were sword fighting. And my father gets killed and throws down his sword. So as we were going, and then I have to come in and say, you know, revenge. And the tenor says to me, this one tenor said to me, if you can't reach his sword in time, take mine. Well, in the time of the performance, by God, the guy playing my father was very dramatic, and he flung the sword all the way across the stage. I had 2 measures of music to be able to go and pick up his sword and continue my revenge. And thank God he told me about that, and I could pick up his sword. So that was really lucky. That sounds like kind of a small world, but I mean, I got that tenor who told me that at that time, and certainly saved some embarrassment and new music. Okay, Hope.
Thank you. Jenny, what you got?
Oh, okay. Serendipity. I was working for the State Department of Vocational Rehab when I got a letter of acceptance for my PhD program. And I said to myself, how am I going to do it? I work here and then I have to go to San Diego for that PhD program. So I put it on a shelf for a few months or, maybe a year. And I still was contemplating, how am I going to do working full time, going to school in San Diego? And so one day I was at the restroom after a conference and I saw a woman that resembled a friend of mine, Bibi. And I said, are you Bibi's daughter? And she said to me, yes, that's my mom. What is she doing? Well, she got a PhD from San Diego, but the university I wanted to go. How did she do it? Oh, she got her she went to the car, put the key on, and she drove to San Diego and she finished. The following day, I'm driving to San Diego, and that's how I started the program in my PhD. If I wouldn't have met that girl, I would never have been able to do it because it was too difficult. And I did it. I worked full time and went to school in San Diego. I used to leave the house at 6 p.m. At 6 p.m. was the class in San Diego, came back at 10 o'clock. And I was married at the time, so the marriage didn't survive the PhD program. But I did it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm reminded of Dylan's song, A Simple Twist of Fate. Sarah, go ahead. And Mark.
Yes, I hope I can get through this. So last year I was at a Jungian conference, which was a couple hours away from here. And I was sitting in the room and somebody was giving a lecture, and this woman raised her hand and she stopped the lecture and she was like, everybody look outside. And we all looked, and there was this most beautiful rainbow over, Tuscany, just absolutely breathtaking. A few hours later, I received a call that my cat, who was my soulmate, had to be taken to the hospital, and he was having seizures and really sick. So we had to get in a cab and come back home, and the next day we had to say goodbye to him. And I hit a really low point and went to a really dark place. And a couple of days later, Mary Grace sent me the myth of the Rainbow Bridge, where I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and where animals go to wait for their owners. And that same evening, I was walking on one of the bridges and somebody was singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And that just touched me in a way that was so deep that I went home and I wrote a poem for him and I called it Somewhere Over the Rainbow Bridge. And that definitely healed a part of me. So thank you for this great topic, Thomas.
Thank you. Martha?
Hi. I came from a small town in Central California, and I came down to LA to go to UCLA, and I was, of course, scared and insecure like any other teenager, and having to make new friends. And my next door neighbor invited me to go study at the library. So I walked to the library with her, and we sat there, and she said, "Oh, there's my friend across the way," and she waved to him, and he came over, and she introduced us, and then we became friends. And after time becoming friends, I came to find out that he was a really good friend of my brother, who had already graduated and moved away, but he had been there a year before me, and was my brother's last year there. And so I thought, that is so weird. I used to hear about him all the time from my brother, and they would double date with identical twins and wear crazy costumes. And so I'd always wanted to meet this guy, but I met him through, such a weird roundabout way, and which I thought was such a kind of a small world thing. And then a couple of years later, I married him. So that was also serendipitous.
Uh-huh. It's so much fun to ask people how they met, isn't it? You get those. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes. I see you, Lisa. I'll collect you in a second. Maybe now it's a good time to reflect on what's the immediate impact of these stories, our feeling and our thinking, maybe on our behavior, and what's the long-term impact of these stories? What's it like to live in a world with these stories, immersed in these stories? So go ahead, Lisa.
So I just have a little simple serendipitous story. So usually when I'm wandering around the world, I find little things like 5 cents or a dime or quarters. And I had a really wonderful serendipitous gift. It was, I don't know, many years ago, and Wicked was playing at the Pantages in Hollywood. And I was walking through the parking lot, and there was some looked like fake Monopoly money on the ground. And I walked over there, and sure enough, there were two $200 bills just sitting there with my name on it. So of course, that night, the people that I went to see Wicked with, we went and had a really nice dinner with the $200 that I found. So that's kind of a fun little story about just, I guess, being in the right place at the right time. So.
Okay. I guess we have one more minute. Any reflections on the impact? Yeah, go ahead, Melanie.
I know for me, hearing people's stories and just reflecting on, I was going through my mind trying to think of all the things. And I mean, there are just dozens and dozens of incredible synchronicities in my lifetime. And it just makes me optimistic and enthusiastic and curious. It reminds me to pay attention to my surroundings. I always say, I could be sitting next to the president and not look over and recognize him, just being unaware. But this reminds me to keep my eyes open and be available to all that can show up for us.
Thank you. Jenny, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, for me, it's to trust that the improbable happens and followed by the impossible. So when I am in an adventure and it presents itself, the fear disappears and I just follow through with what's presenting. And that's improbable and impossible. And I would say, how did this happen? And it's amazing because the fear gets removed and it's just being in the moment. So thank you for this. It's wonderful.
Sure. Thank you. Whitney, you might be the last one and then we'll change over.
I just feel that there's a spiritual component that these things all happen out of our expectations of time, of logic, and that something else in the ethers, you know, just gets to slip down into our lives and unite us and uplift us, and it's pretty nice. In whatever parlance you want to use, and some could be called miracles, or some could be just, you know, what is that God wink thing? That's cute. So that's kind of a long-term thing, especially dead people that come back and talk to people and say, I'm okay. I love that.
We're all cradled in serendipity, maybe. Okay, thank you all. Appreciate your participation. That was rich.